It was a bright, busy Tuesday afternoon in the heart of Beverly Hills, a place where the sun always seems to shine a little brighter on the wealthy. The streets were lined with expensive cars and palm trees, hiding a world that values appearance more than anything else. Right in the middle of this glamorous world sat a very famous beauty salon known as L'Eclat. This wasn't just a place to get a haircut. It was a status symbol. Only the richest people could afford to walk through those glass doors, and everyone knew it. Outside the salon, a dark, simple car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a flashy sports car or a long limousine. It was just a normal vehicle, the kind you might see anywhere. The door opened, and Keanu Reeves stepped out. If you didn't know who he was, you might not have looked twice. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or designer jeans. He was dressed in his usual comfortable clothes, a loose-fitting jacket, a simple t-shirt, and boots that looked like they had walked through miles of city streets. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, trying to hide his face, not out of arrogance, but because he was tired and just wanted a quiet moment. Keanu had been working hard for months on a new movie. His schedule was packed, and he barely had time to sleep, let alone take care of himself. He just wanted a simple trim, a shave, and maybe a few minutes of peace before he had to go back to the chaotic movie set. He didn't want a red carpet event. He just wanted a haircut. He walked toward the entrance of L'Eclat. Through the glass, he could see the inside. It was beautiful, filled with shiny mirrors, golden scissors, and soft leather chairs. The air inside was cool and smelled like expensive flowers and chemicals. Keanu took a deep breath and pushed the door open. As soon as he walked in, the vibe of the room changed. It was subtle but noticeable. The chatter in the room quieted down for a split second. Inside, the clients were sitting in high chairs, draped in white capes, looking like royalty. They were dressed in clothes that cost more than most people make in a year. When Keanu walked in, he looked completely different. He looked real, grounded, and out of place. Behind the large front desk stood the receptionist. She was a woman who took her job very seriously. She had perfectly styled hair and makeup that looked painted on. Her job was to guard the door, not just to take appointments, but to make sure only the right kind of people got in. She was typing something on her computer when she heard the door chime. She didn't look up immediately. When she finally did, her eyes scanned Keanu from his boots to his cap. She didn't see a movie star. She saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, wearing worn-out clothes in a palace of luxury. Keanu walked up to the desk with his hands in his pockets. He gave a small, polite smile, the kind he always gives people, regardless of who they are. "Hi there," he said softly. "I was wondering if you have any time for a walk-in? Maybe a haircut or a trim for the beard?" The receptionist looked at him, then back at her computer screen, barely making eye contact. There was no smile in return. She didn't recognize his face because he wasn't wearing a suit and he wasn't demanding attention. In her mind, he was just someone wandering in off the street who probably couldn't afford a glass of water, let alone a hairstyle from one of their elite stylists. She let out a loud, annoyed sigh, making sure he could hear it. "We are extremely busy today," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "And we usually require appointments weeks in advance." Keanu nodded, understanding. "I get that," he replied politely. "I don't mind waiting. I can sit over there. Or if someone cancels, I can take that spot." The receptionist stopped typing and looked at him again, this time with a look of disbelief. She couldn't believe he was still standing there. The smell of the street, she thought, seemed to cling to him, and it was messing up the perfect perfumed air of the salon. She leaned over the counter, lowering her voice just enough so the other clients wouldn't hear the exact words, but loud enough for Keanu to feel the sting. "Look," she said, her tone patronizing. "This isn't just a barber shop. We offer a luxury experience. Our stylists are artists. We don't just take anyone off the sidewalk." Keanu stood there looking at her. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just looked a bit sad. He was used to people judging books by covers, but it never felt good. He saw a few of the clients in the chairs turning their heads to look. A woman in a silk robe was whispering to her stylist, pointing at Keanu's scuffed boots. Another man in a suit smirked into his magazine. Keanu could feel their eyes on him, looking at him like he was a speck of dirt on a clean floor. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, being judged by people who didn't know a single thing about him. "I can pay," Keanu said quietly, trying one last time to reason with her. "I just really need a trim." The receptionist laughed, a short, dry sound. "It's not just about the money, honey," she said, using a word that was meant to cut deep. "It's about the standard. We maintain a certain image here, and, well, you understand. I'm sure there's a shop down the street that fits your needs better." The humiliation hung in the air. Keanu looked around the room one more time. He saw the judgment, the arrogance, and the coldness. He realized that no matter what he said or how much money he offered, they had already decided who he was. He wasn't a customer to them. He was a problem. He took his hands out of his pockets, fixed his jacket, and gave a small nod. "Okay," he said simply. "Have a good day." He turned around to leave, his back straight, holding on to his dignity even though they had tried to take it away. The receptionist went back to her typing, satisfied that she had protected her salon from someone who didn't belong. The room went back to its normal noise, but the air felt even colder than before. As Keanu walked toward the glass door, the weight of the moment pressed down on him, reminding him that in a world of shiny surfaces, being real is often the hardest thing to be. The air inside the salon felt heavy and sticky, despite the cool air conditioning humming quietly in the background. Keanu stood near the desk for a moment longer, looking at the receptionist with a calm expression. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't leaving immediately either. He was hoping that maybe, just maybe, if he looked them in the eye, they would see a human being instead of a problem. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the worn leather of his boots making no sound on the pristine, white marble floor. The receptionist, however, had no intention of letting this go. She felt she had won a small victory, and now she wanted to make sure everyone else in the room knew it too. She leaned an elbow on the counter, resting her chin in her hand, and looked past Keanu as if he were a piece of furniture blocking the view. "I'm serious." "Honey," she said, her voice loud enough to carry across the room, "we have a very specific clientele here. People come here to relax, to get away from the noise of the city. They don't want to worry about security issues while they are getting their hair done." The word security hung in the air like a dark cloud. It was a code word. Everyone knew what she meant, even though she didn't say it outright. She was implying that he looked dangerous, or at least unwanted, from across the room. A stylist with bright blonde hair and sharp scissors in his hand chimed in. He was currently combing through the hair of an older woman wrapped in a silk cape. He didn't look up from his work, but his voice was clear and dripping with sarcasm. "It's true," the stylist said, flicking his wrist dramatically. "You can't just let anyone walk in off the street. This is a luxury establishment. We have a reputation to maintain. Some people just don't have the sophistication for this environment." The older woman in the chair giggled, a high-pitched, cruel sound. She glanced over at Keanu, her eyes scanning his dirty boots and simple jacket. She whispered something to the stylist, and they both laughed. Keanu watched them. A few years ago, this might have made him angry. He might have shouted at them or told them who he really was. But he had learned a lot about life since then. He knew that people who judged others by the price of their clothes were usually the ones who were the most unhappy. He knew that their laughter was empty. Still, it hurt. It is never easy to be laughed at, especially when you are trying your best to be polite. He looked around the room. There were about 6 or 7 other clients waiting or getting their hair done. A young man in an expensive suit was reading a magazine, pretending to ignore the scene, but a smirk played on his lips. Another woman, checking her phone, looked annoyed that Keanu was still there, disturbing the peace of her bubble. Not a single person looked at him with kindness. Not a single person told the staff to stop being rude. They were all part of it now. They were a team, and he was the outsider. The receptionist saw that she had an audience. She straightened her back, feeling powerful. She decided to push a little harder. She picked up a pen and tapped it on the counter, a fast, impatient rhythm. "Look," she said, her voice losing the fake sweetness and turning hard. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave. I have a very important client coming in at 2 o'clock. I cannot have you standing here looking like that. It's bad for business. You understand, right? It's nothing personal. Keanu took a deep breath. He looked at the floor, then back at her. It feels a little personal, he said softly. His voice was so quiet that she almost didn't hear him. But I understand. I'll go. He turned to walk away, but she wasn't done. She wanted the last word. She wanted to make sure he felt small when he walked out that door. And don't try to come back, she called out as his hand touched the metal handle of the glass door. We have your description. Next time, we won't be so nice about asking you to leave. Keanu stopped. His hand gripped the door handle tightly. For a second, the room went completely silent. The scissors stopped snipping. The whispers died down. Everyone was watching to see what the scruffy man would do. Would he yell? Would he cause a scene? He didn't. He simply looked over his shoulder. He didn't look at the receptionist with hate. Instead, he looked at her with a look of genuine sadness. It was the kind of look you give someone when you realize they have lost their way. It was a look that said, I hope you find happiness someday, because you won't find it in this furniture or this money. Have a good afternoon, Keanu said. He said it clearly and he meant it. He pushed the door open and stepped back out into the bright California sun as the door closed behind him. Sealing him out, the atmosphere inside the salon changed instantly. The tension released, replaced by a wave of gossip. The stylist laughed again, louder this time. Can you believe the nerve of some people? He asked the room, shaking his head. He probably thought if he begged enough I'd give him a free haircut. I thought he was going to pull a knife or something, the older woman said, clutching her pearls. He looked so intense. The receptionist laughed, picking up her phone to text a friend. She felt good. She felt like she had protected her territory. She felt like the queen of her castle. They all went back to their lives, sipping their espresso, reading their magazines, and congratulating each other on how superior they were. They didn't know that the man they had just thrown out was one of the most famous and respected actors in the world. They didn't know that he could have bought their entire salon with the money in his bank account without even noticing. Inside, they felt safe and superior. Outside, Keanu Reeves walked down the street, alone again, the echo of their laughter still ringing in his ears. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, his hands in his pockets, heading toward a part of town where people didn't care about boots or jackets. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. He had a feeling that the universe had a way of balancing things out, even if he had to wait for it. He just kept walking, the sun warm on his face, trying to shake off the feeling of being invisible. Inside the salon, the cruel laughter had died down, replaced by the soft buzzing of hairdryers and the clinking of expensive coffee cups. The staff felt a sense of relief, like they had successfully cleaned up a mess. The stylist with the blonde hair was back to work, snipping away with extra flair, feeling like the king of the world. The receptionist was back to her computer, typing furiously, probably complaining to a friend about the weirdo who had just walked in. They felt safe in their bubble, believing that they were the gatekeepers of beauty and class, but outside, the California sun was still shining, and the world was much bigger than their salon, just a few yards away from the glass doors. A young woman was rushing down the sidewalk. She was clearly in a panic. She was wearing a simple outfit, carrying a tray with 4 coffees in one hand and a stack of thick papers under her other arm. She was an assistant, likely working for one of the big-shot producers nearby. Her day had been a disaster so far she was late, the coffee line was long, and she was terrified of getting yelled at again. She wasn't looking where she was going. Her eyes were fixed on the traffic light, praying it wouldn't turn red. Keanu Reeves, who had walked only a short distance away, was standing near a lamppost. He was checking his phone, maybe looking for a different, friendlier place to get a haircut, or perhaps just texting a friend. He saw the young woman rushing toward him, struggling with her heavy load. She was looking at the street, not at him. As she hurried past, The edge of her paper stack caught the sleeve of a passerby. She stumbled forward, the tray tilting dangerously. It looked like she was about to spill hot coffee all over herself in the sidewalk. Without hesitating for a second, Keanu reached out. He steadied the tray with one hand and caught her arm with the other, stopping her from falling. The coffee cups wobbled but stayed up. "Whoa, careful there," Keanu said, his voice low and steady. "You got it?" The young woman gasped, her heart pounding. She looked up to thank the stranger who had saved her morning. The sun was in her eyes for a second, but as her vision focused, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. Everyone knew that face. It wasn't just a guy. It was him. It was the guy from the movies. The guy who was always kind in interviews. The guy everyone in Hollywood respected. "Mr. Reeves?" she whispered, her eyes going wide. Keanu smiled, that gentle smile of his, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Yeah, that's me. Are you okay? You almost took a spill." I'm fine," she stammered, completely starstruck. "I was just running. I'm so sorry I didn't see you." "Don't worry about it," Keanu said, letting go of her arm once she was steady. "Just be careful, okay? These sidewalks can be tricky." He gave her a small nod and turned to walk away. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want an autograph or a selfie. He just wanted to help, but then the young woman looked past him. She saw the sign for the salon he was walking away from. She saw the Leclat logo on the glass door. A confused look crossed her face. She knew that salon. She dropped papers off there all the time for her boss, who got his hair done there. It was the most expensive, most snobbish place in the city. "Wait," she called out, stepping after him. Did you just come out of there?" Keanu stopped and turned back. He looked at the salon, then back at her. He didn't want to gossip. He didn't want to complain. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I just needed a trim. But they're booked up? Or maybe I'm not the right fit." "It's all good." The young woman's face went from confused to angry in a split second. She knew exactly what that meant. She knew the staff at that salon. She knew how they looked at people. The thought of them treating Keanu Reeves, the nicest guy in Hollywood, like dirt, made her blood boil. "They didn't let you in?" she asked, her voice rising. Keanu put a hand up, trying to calm her down. "It's really okay. I don't want any trouble." But it was too late. The assistant was furious. "They don't know who you are?" "They didn't ask," Keanu said simply. The young woman couldn't believe it. She grabbed her coffees and her papers and marched toward the salon door. Keanu stood there for a moment, not sure if he should follow or just disappear, but his feet stayed planted. He was curious, and honestly, he was a little touched that someone was standing up for him. The young woman pushed the heavy glass door open with her shoulder, marching in with a burst of energy that shattered the calm, snobby atmosphere of the room. The little bell above the door jingled aggressively. The receptionist looked up, annoyed by the sudden intrusion. "Excuse me?" "We don't allow," but she stopped mid-sentence. She recognized the assistant. The assistant came in here all the time. But before the receptionist could say anything else, the assistant spun around and pointed a shaking finger toward the street, where Keanu was standing in the doorway, looking in with his hands in his pockets. "Do you have any idea who you just kicked out?" The assistant shouted. Her voice echoed off the marble walls. The stylist stopped cutting hair. The clients put down their magazines. The room went deadly silent. The receptionist blinked, confused. "What? That guy? The homeless-looking one?" "That guy," the assistant said, her voice dripping with disbelief, "is Keanu Reeves." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. For a second, nobody moved. The receptionist just stared at the assistant, her brain trying to process the information. She looked at the door, at the man in the worn-out jacket, and then back at the assistant. It was like a joke she didn't understand. "No," the receptionist said, laughing nervously. "No, that's not him." "I know what Keanu Reeves looks like. He wears suits to premieres. He drives fancy cars. That guy is a nobody." The stylist walked over from his chair, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked skeptical too. Don't be ridiculous. Why would Keanu Reeves come in here looking like that? Because he's a human being. The assistant yelled. Because he doesn't care about your stupid dress code. I just talked to him outside. He held the door for me when I almost dropped these coffees. He was polite. He was kind. And you humiliated him. She turned to look at Keanu, who was still standing in the open doorway. He hadn't stepped inside yet. He was watching them with a calm, almost sad expression. The assistant waved him in. Come here, please, she said to him. Keanu stepped inside. The silence was deafening now. The receptionist's face was turning pale. She looked at his face again, really looked at it this time, without the filter of her judgment. She saw the jawline, the eyes, the specific shape of his nose. She saw the man she had seen in hundreds of movies sitting on her couch on Sunday nights. The stylist dropped his towel. The older woman in the silk robe gasped audibly, clutching her chest. Oh my God, the receptionist whispered. Her hand flew to her mouth. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. The reality crashed into her like a truck. The man they had mocked, the man they had called security risk, the man they had treated like garbage, was a superstar. Not just a superstar, but one of the most beloved actors on the planet, and they had just thrown him out. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. The arrogance that had filled the space just 5 minutes ago vanished, replaced by a cold, gripping fear. They all looked at Keanu, terrified of what he would do. They had thrown the first stone, and now the giant was standing in their living room. The silence inside the salon was so heavy that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You could hear a pin drop. The receptionist stood frozen behind her desk, her face turning a shade of white that matched the marble floor. Her eyes were wide, darting from the young assistant back to Keanu, who was standing calmly near the entrance. It felt like a dream, a terrible, confusing dream where the rug had been pulled out from under her feet. The stylist, usually so confident and sharp, looked like he had seen a ghost. He was holding his comb in midair, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the man in the worn jacket, really looked at him. The nose, the jawline, the kindness in his eyes that he had missed completely because he was too busy looking at the dirt on the man's boots. It was him. There was no doubt about it. They had just treated one of the most famous and respected actors in the world like a criminal. The atmosphere instantly shifted from arrogant superiority to pure panic. The receptionist's brain was racing. She knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was a disaster. If Keanu Reeves walked out of here angry, if he told this story to a magazine or posted about it on social media, their reputation would be ruined. People would boycott them. They would be known as the salon that humiliated the nicest guy in Hollywood. Oh my God, the receptionist finally gasped, her voice trembling. She stepped out from behind the desk, her hands shaking. Mr. Reeves? Sir, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. You look so different without the suits and the lights. She was stumbling over her words, trying to find an excuse. It sounded pathetic even to her own ears. She forced a smile onto her face, a smile that was terrified and fake. We would love to serve you. Of course, we have a chair open. Actually, our best stylist just finished up. He can take you right now. Please come in. The stylist quickly jumped in, dropping his towel on the floor. Yes, absolutely. Please, have a seat. It would be an honor. I can give you the works, free of charge. No, wait, on the house. For life, the clients in the chairs were whispering furiously now. The older woman who had laughed earlier was now clutching her pearls, looking at Keanu with awe. The man in the expensive suit put down his magazine, staring with his mouth open. They were all waiting to see what he would do. Would he yell? Would he scream at them? Would he demand to speak to the owner and get them all fired? In their world, that is what a powerful person would do. That is what they would have done, but Keanu just stood there. He watched the receptionist and the stylist scramble over each other. bowing and scraping, offering him the throne they had denied him just minutes ago. He saw the fear in their eyes. They weren't sorry because they had been rude to a human being. They were sorry because they had been rude to a rich human being. They were terrified of the consequences. They didn't care that they had hurt his feelings. They only cared that they might lose their jobs. Keanu let out a small, soft sigh. He didn't look angry. He actually looked a bit tired. He raised one hand gently, palm out, signaling for them to stop. "Please," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their panic instantly. "You don't have to do that." The receptionist stopped talking, but she was still trembling. But we made a mistake. We want to make it right." Keanu looked her in the eye. His gaze was intense but kind. "You told me earlier that you were fully booked," he said softly. "You said you maintain a certain image here. You were very honest about what you thought of me. I appreciate that honesty." The stylist flinched as if he had been slapped. The words he had said earlier that Keanu didn't belong, that he wasn't sophisticated, were hanging over him now like a dark cloud. "We can make an exception," the stylist cried out, his voice cracking. "Please sit down." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I think I'm okay. I've been in this business a long time. I know the difference between someone who wants to cut my hair and someone who wants to cut my hair because of who I am. I'm just looking for a haircut, not a favor." The rejection was gentle, but it stung more than any shout could have. He was telling them that their fake kindness was worse than their real rudeness. He didn't want their service now. He didn't want to sit in a leather chair and pretend everything was fine. Just because they knew his name, he turned to the young assistant who had rushed in. She was standing nearby, looking furious at the staff, but relieved that he wasn't making a scene. Keanu smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you for sticking up for me," he said to her. "That was very kind. But don't worry about it, all right? It's not worth getting upset over." The assistant looked like she wanted to cry. "They were so rude to you," she whispered. "You didn't deserve that." Keanu shrugged. "It happens. We're all just trying to get through the day, right?" He looked around the room one last time. His eyes landed on a man in the corner, a janitor who was sweeping up hair clippings. The janitor had been watching the whole thing, his eyes wide. He looked like he felt out of place too, just like Keanu had moments ago. Keanu walked over to him. The staff watched, confused. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He pressed them into the janitor's hand. "Thank you for keeping the place clean," Keanu whispered to him. "I hope you have a great rest of your day." The janitor, shocked, nodded silently. He couldn't believe it. The celebrity was tipping the cleaner, not the people who demanded attention. Keanu turned back to the front desk. The receptionist looked like she was about to cry. She felt small, incredibly small. Here she was, dressed in her finest clothes, acting like she was better than everyone. And the man she had insulted had just shown more class in 5 minutes than she had shown in her entire life. "Have a good afternoon, everyone," Keanu said simply. He adjusted his cap, lowering it slightly over his eyes. "And maybe try to be a little nicer to the next person who walks through that door. You never know who they are." He turned and walked toward the glass doors. There was no slam, no dramatic exit. He just opened the door and stepped out into the sunshine. The bell chimed softly, signaling his departure. The salon remained silent for a long time after the door closed. The receptionist slumped against the counter, covering her face with her hands. The stylist stood frozen, looking at the empty chair that Keanu could have sat in. The clients looked at each other, uncomfortable, realizing they had witnessed something terrible. They had seen the face of cruelty, and then they had seen the face of true dignity. And the dignity had won. Nobody spoke for a full minute. The air conditioning hummed, mocking them. They realized they hadn't just lost a customer. They had lost a chance to be decent human beings. And that was a loss they couldn't fix with a free haircut. The glass door clicked shut, and the little bell above it gave one last soft ring. But inside the salon, the silence that followed was loud and heavy. It was the kind of silence that feels suffocating, like the air had been sucked right out of the room. Everyone stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Keanu had just been standing. The receptionist was gripping the edge of the marble counter so hard her knuckles turned white. The stylist was staring at his own reflection in the mirror, but he wasn't seeing his hair or his clothes. He was seeing a person who had just acted terribly. The luxury atmosphere that they prized so much was completely gone. It felt fake now. The shiny gold scissors and the expensive leather chairs suddenly looked silly, like costumes in a play that nobody wanted to watch. The clients in the waiting area stopped whispering. They looked uncomfortable. Some of them began checking their phones, avoiding eye contact with the staff. They had witnessed something ugly, and it made them feel guilty just for being there. The young assistant, who had rushed in to save the day, looked at the staff with a look of pure disappointment. She shook her head slowly. "I can't believe you guys," she muttered, her voice thick with frustration. She didn't even wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked out, deciding she would rather stand on the street corner than spend another second in a place with so little heart. That was the moment the reality really hit the receptionist. She slid down into her fancy chair, burying her face in her hands. She wasn't crying because she lost a famous customer. She was crying because she felt small. She realized that while she was busy judging Keanu's jacket and his boots, he was busy being a gentleman. He had more class in his little finger than she had in her entire body. She had chased away a good person for no reason other than her own pride. Meanwhile, outside, the world kept moving. The sun was still shining and the cars were still driving by. Keanu Reeves didn't stomp down the street in anger. He didn't look back at the salon with hatred. He just walked. He walked 2 blocks down, turned a corner, and found a small, old-fashioned barbershop. It wasn't fancy. There was a spinning red and white pole outside, and the window was a little dusty. He pushed the door open. A bell rang, just like in the other salon, but this place felt different immediately. It smelled of talcum powder and old leather. The radio was playing an upbeat rock song. 2 barbers in white coats were cutting hair, laughing and joking with their customers. Keanu walked up to the counter. An older man with gray hair and a warm smile looked up from his newspaper. "Afternoon. Can I help you, son?" "Yeah," Keanu said, his shoulders finally relaxing. "I was hoping for a haircut. Do you have time?" The old man chuckled. "For a nice-looking fellow like you?" "Always." "Hop in the chair." Keanu sat down. The barber draped a simple cloth around his neck, not silk, just clean cotton. "What'll it be?" the barber asked. "Just a trim. Clean up the beard?" "You got it," Keanu said. For the next 20 minutes, Keanu didn't have to worry about being judged. The barber didn't care if he was a movie star or a bus driver. He just asked him about the weather and complimented his boots, saying they looked like they had seen some interesting places. Keanu smiled and laughed. He talked about how much he loved the city. It was a real conversation between 2 human beings. When the haircut was done, Keanu looked in the mirror. It was perfect. He handed the barber some cash and told him to keep the change. "Hey, thanks for coming in," the barber said, clapping a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "You're a good guy. Come back anytime." "I will," Keanu promised. He walked out of the little barbershop feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The humiliation from the fancy salon was gone, washed away by simple kindness. He realized that he didn't need their champagne or their marble floors. He just needed to be treated like a person. Back at L'Eclat, the mood had turned into a funeral. The stylist went into the back room, feeling sick to his stomach. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Keanu had looked at the janitor. That small act of kindness had destroyed the stylist's ego. He realized that he spent all his time trying to look important, but he wasn't important at all. He was just a bully with expensive scissors. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Not on the news and not in a big explosion, but through whispers. The assistant told her boss, a big movie producer. He told his friends at parties. The clients who were there that day told their families. Slowly, the reputation of the salon changed. People stopped coming not because they were told to, but because they didn't want to be part of a place that felt so cold. When people walked past Leclat now, they didn't see a palace of beauty. They saw a place with nice furniture but no soul. The staff stayed, but they were different. They were quieter. They stopped judging people by their clothes, but the damage was done. The magic was gone. The ending that nobody expected wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't an angry rant on TV. It was a quiet shift in the universe. Keanu Reeves went on being happy, making movies, and living his life with the same humble heart he always had. He didn't need revenge because he knew something the salon staff didn't. Kindness is the only real luxury. The salon had the price tags, but Keanu had the value. And at the end of the day, no amount of money can buy a decent heart. The glass doors of Leclat remained shiny and clean, but they would always be empty of the one thing that truly matters: humanity. Keanu walked away with his head high, leaving them with a lesson they would never forget. That true class is about how you treat others, especially when you think nobody is watching.